Well, let's get started. So like I said, good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday morning. And thank you for joining us for another edition of the MLA Connect Coffee Hour. This is actually the 15th coffee hour that we have hosted since things really changed for all of us in March. And many of them have predominantly focused on public libraries and their impact on communities. And so I think that this one is definitely an important conversation that it's time to have, where we talk more specifically just about the impacts for our academic libraries. And so before we get started, I want to take just a brief minute and go through a couple of housekeeping things. So you are welcome to type into the chat box or unmute yourself to ask any questions, but I do ask that if you're not speaking to please remain muted, just out of respect for those that are speaking. And like I said, you can either type things into the chat box or raise your hand or unmute yourself. It's really whatever you are most comfortable with. And then to get started this morning, let's practice the chat box a little bit. And I think it's a nice way to start the day. If everyone could type in something that they are really happy about, or something great that happened to them this week, or something they're excited about in the next week. Start off with a little bit of positivity this morning and practice the chat box feature. Oh, saw an eagle. That is fun. And garden is blooming. My garden is blooming a lot of weeds. So Jackie, I can relate with that. And retiring. Oh, kayaking. I've been wanting to kayak so bad. Oh, great. Oh, cooler weather for sure. So great. Well, I'm going to let all of you guys read what is keeping all of you positive and happy this week and next. Thankful for air conditioning. Aren't we all? I think you can see that I'm sweating a little bit. It's very hot these days. So, well, now that everyone has had a little bit of practice with the chat box, why don't we get started? And I am really excited to introduce Jennifer Dean. She is the Dean of Libraries and Instructional Technology at the University of Detroit Mercy Libraries. She's also the ALA counselor for MLA, and as of July 1st, she is MLA's new president. So we're very excited to have her in multiple roles for us. And she's going to lead our conversation today. So welcome, Jennifer. Oh, I think you're muted still.
Yes.
Oh,
I went to start talking and I went, my mute is on. I try to limit my news watching to just a couple hours a day, and I'm noticing more and more people leaving their mute on as they go to start talking on news programs. So maybe we're all getting a little bit of mute Zoom fatigue. So in any case, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Amber. And thank you. I want to start by just saying thank you to MLA. Thank you, Amber, Debbie, Rachel, Lisa, Ryan, everyone is doing in the office, not in the office, remotely. These chats, I know, I regret I have not been able to join. Thursday is our regular Dean's meetings, so this is the first one I'm able to join, and thank you for the Wednesday opportunity. But I know these chats have really kept many of us going, so thank you so much. It's been very strange times, and I'm going to talk a little bit about going back to the back before we talk about the future. But yes, thank you so much for the warm introduction. Before I talk about us and our plans, I'll talk a little bit about who we are at Detroit Mercy in case you're not familiar with us. I do hope it's really great to be with you. I hope everyone's healthy, safe, and well. My role is I'm Dean Dean. I'm Dean of the Libraries and Instructional Technology at University of Detroit Mercy. We are a private institution. We serve about 4,300 students. We're the largest Catholic institution, university in Michigan. We're one of 27 Jesuit higher education institutions in the United States and one of 17 Mercy higher education institutions in the US, but we're the only higher education institution in the US that's both Jesuit and Mercy. And I want to give a shout out to our founding sponsors. Our Jesuits and Mercies are pretty incredible people. They're men and women for others and passionate about social justice and learning, and they treat others with dignity and empathy, and that filters into everything we do and what we teach our students. So as my title suggests, I wear multiple hats, as I imagine many of you do. We have 3 libraries at Detroit Mercy, and today I'm going to primarily be talking about our McNichols campus library. The McNichols campus is our largest campus. We're at the corner of Livernois and 6 Mile in the heart of the neighborhoods in Detroit. That's where the majority of our classes are taught, and it's also where our students live, those who live on campus, and our residence halls. We do have a dental library that's at our Corktown campus near to Wayne State, and I oversee the dental library in partnership with Marilyn Dow, our dental library director. And then we also have a law school library. We work well with those folks. We have a great relationship with them. We work together whenever we can, but that library does report directly to the School of Law, so I don't oversee that library. In addition to the library, I also oversee online education. So that includes our instructional design studio. So those are the folks who work with our faculty to design both face-to-face and online classes, the online component. And that includes faculty support for our Blackboard learning management system and policy and reporting for distance education. So that means it's been a pretty busy semester, as you can imagine. So, like all of you, we are definitely figuring out our next steps here. Most of our university went into emergency remote learning, I want to say March 23rd, it's a blur, I was trying to look it up, in our winter semester, 2020. Our McNichols campus library officially closed to the public on March 16th. We had our last employee meeting, interestingly, on Friday the 13th. We gathered in our first floor conference room, had some pizza, which is a thing we do on Fridays the 13th. We do bosses by lunch. Sounds kind of funny now. We talked about our plans. How are we going to handle the pandemic? What do we need to change to make sure we serve our students and our faculty and look ahead to the future? We were, it was a scary time. It was serious, but, strangely enough, it was heartwarming too. I remember our student employees came to the meeting. We all came together. We talked and planned, and we felt like, okay, we're going to learn as we go, but things make sense. We thought, we can do this. And then Sunday night came, March 15th. I was actually out of town. I was at my sister's house in Ohio. It was kind of the last visit before we were all going to hunker down. And I got a phone call from one of my colleagues. We're not just a library at the McNichols campus. We share our space with a couple of other units, good colleagues, tutoring center, some TRIO, federally funded program, student support center, Upward Bound, and our instructional design studio. One of my colleagues called and let me know that they had been exposed to the virus. Not directly, their partner had been exposed at work to a person who was sick. And my colleague didn't think that the risk was very high, but they didn't find out until the weekend, and they probably really shouldn't have been at work on Friday. And it probably wasn't a big deal, probably wasn't a lot of danger, but could I let housekeeping know, because really probably ought to clean their area of the library. And so I hung up the phone and I sat there and I thought, wow, we didn't know very much at that time. We didn't know, it's okay, as a third-hand exposure. I started searching the internet. I mean, what did we know about third-hand exposure? And I thought, I did talk to that person on Friday. And then my face just went white. And I thought, that person was in our conference room right before we all sat and had pizza. And I thought, no, it's not for me to make a decision for everyone else about whether or not it's safe for them to come back to the library. So I called our associate deans, and they got on the phone and called everyone. And I'm going to spare you all the gory details. Long story short, we closed the library for that Monday, talked to public safety in the middle of the night. Some of the communication did get a little out of hand. I had some tense conversations with my provost, but at the end of the day, my heart was at peace. I'm never going to feel sorry about giving people information they need to make the best decision for themselves. People definitely were curious. Why is the library closed? What happened? Is the virus in the library? Are we safe? Can I come back? All of that. But the library, we have not been open since that day, because you may remember the order closing libraries came not long after that. So we quickly went into telecommuting for our campus very shortly after that, because the stay-home order came in place. And once the stay-home order was extended, our university made the decision to continue with online-only teaching for the summer. And so then our associate VP for facilities, our provost, and I made the decision to keep the building, our library building, closed for the summer so that we could save on facilities costs. So that made other decisions necessary. We were able to keep all of our staff working for the telecommuting period in the winter by taking project work home, engaging in extended professional development, but we really couldn't sustain this through the summer. So right now we do have staff who are furloughed, 5 full-time and 1 part-time staff. We're looking though ahead to fall, and I'll be talking with our HR folks later this week about what our plans are for fall and how we can work with all of our staff. So when I shared the announcement about this session in an email to our Detroit Mercy team, I shared that we certainly don't have our fall plans worked out yet. I didn't want them to think that I was going to share something here that I haven't shared with them. And I was feeling a little bit guilty about not having a plan in place. I mean, it's July, and I know our students, our faculty, and our employees really are feeling anxious. I mean, we are 2 months from the start of classes. The library is still closed. The days are going to go by quickly. And then last night, I caught the end of an interview and part of my nightly news watching with an author and a researcher at UNC Chapel Hill. She wrote a book called Lower Ed on for-profit education. Her name's Tressie McMillan Cottom. And I was reassured as much as we can in this time. Her thoughts really aligned with mine. She said, we make plans now because we must manage our own and others' anxiety, but we really don't know what the virus is going to do. We don't know what our governments are going to do. So any plans that we make now might be useless in August. If COVID cases skyrocket in mid-August, if Michigan residents are under stay-home orders, we're not going to be able to open. And yet, we plan because we have to manage our own and others' anxiety. And even if the plans we make right now aren't useful in August, well, they're going to be useful at another point in this pandemic. Quite frankly, when we did our building walkthrough, our facilities folks were pretty impressed because we're ready now. We already have everything set up for social distancing because we were ready in March. So before I go on, I'm getting close to the end of my spiel here so we can get on to questions. I just want to say I hope my story of what happened at the start of this pandemic really shines a light on what I hope will be our primary takeaway today. Be hopeful and be gentle. Be gentle with yourself and with your students and faculty, with your colleagues, and definitely with your administration, whether that's your dean or director of your library, with your provost, with your head of facilities, with your president. None of us train for this. None of us know what's going to come. And none of us really know how we're going to feel from moment to moment. One of my colleagues and I at another library were talking about the emotional weight of this. You know, we are sensitive people, and other people, you know, our emotions are running high. So it can be, we can feel really good, and then the next moment, just something, we can hear some really hard news. So we don't know what other people that we're working with are dealing with. So do take time to take care of yourself. If you've got some vacation time now, take it, get your sleep, take your breaks, and tell people you appreciate them. So I want to make sure to say that. So that's a lot of talking without telling you any fall plans and without launching into questions. So let me start wrapping up by saying that our university, Detroit Mercy, does plan to hold classes in both face-to-face and online format in the fall. We have, we're a liberal arts institution, but we do have nursing. We have quite a few professional programs, including nursing and dentistry. And those include clinical components that can't be done online. I don't think anybody wants to go to a dentist who never worked on a real person. There's also a lot of accreditation and state licensing requirements that really can only be met certain ways, although it's been very interesting watching how states and other licensing agencies have dealt with, you know, how do we help these students who have done everything right, and now we are dealing with a pandemic? How do we move them on in their careers? So our faculty are busy now designing their classes. And so that's been interesting for our library faculty who work with our teaching faculty with library instruction. And we've had a lot of discussion about how library instruction works best. So, but we also know we've got to work in concert with our teaching colleagues. So some of our faculty are going to choose HyFlex design. They're working now with our instructional designers. For us, and I'm sure HyFlex is a familiar term to some of us on the call, but in case it is not, HyFlex, if you capitalize the H and the F, that is an actual formal learning theory. There's a gentleman in California who created HyFlex, capital H, capital F. The way we mean it is small h, small f, hybrid flexible. And that's really any teaching style that is hybrid, meaning a mix of in-person and online, and flexible. The idea is that a student may not know, you know, you could plan to be in person, but your plans could change and now you have to be online. A faculty member may have to change their plans so that that a person can be in person, they can be online. It could change throughout the semester. We want to reduce stress on students if format has to change mid-semester, and that people can be working in both formats. It's a lot of work, and I really do feel for our faculty because they're having to think, they've said, am I really designing 2 classes? And we're saying, no, you're really designing 1, but it's a lot of work for them. But let's be honest, because they are teaching that way, we are having to offer high flex library. We have to have a physical library and we have to have a virtual library. And we really have only had to offer a virtual library since March. So one of the plans our university made was to begin our semester a week earlier than we planned, and then to end our classes before Thanksgiving, and then to hold our finals completely online. So that means that I'm planning to reopen our library to employees on August 3rd. Not everyone will return. We're still talking about that. I'll be talking with people individually because we had a survey for all of our employees on campus back in May, many of whom shared, I don't know, I need to know more about what the university is going to be doing in terms of looking out for our safety before I know how comfortable I am coming back, to talk about, okay, what options do we have for you working in person? Some people, their job really lends itself to telecommuting. So there's a lot of moral concerns I have wrapped up in that too. Any case, some of us, we are definitely being encouraged to telecommute if we can. However, on the other hand, we're saying, hey, we're still going to provide the on-campus experience, right? So we're balancing those 2 things. So those of us who do come back on August 3rd, facilities is going to be doing a lot of work. They're setting up plexiglass at our circulation desk. They're not going to have enough to do everything throughout the building all over the campus that everyone might want. So we're going to have to do a lot with social distancing. We're not going to allow people to be everywhere in the building because we want to, we will be sort of in charge. We're going to talk about what that looks like and what we can reasonably do to make sure that people are observing social distancing and wearing their masks where they need to be. So that's what we'll be doing from August 3rd to August 17th. On August 17th, we will open to the public, and then August 24th, we'll have a little longer hours, but we are really looking at what those hours for the physical library are going to be, with having longer hours with a virtual library. And again, some folks I think really do need to be home. I think about, I hate to say it, but people are going to get normal sick too. We're not huge. And so at a certain point, how do we make sure that some segment of the library can always keep going no matter what happens in the fall? So I think I'm going to stop there because we got some really great questions from people when you registered about how we're handling specific things. Some of the questions, I'll just sort of say them here, and then I'd love to hear from other people. I can talk a little bit about some of the things we've talked about here. A couple of questions about reserves and non-book items, things like calculators, things like that. Talk about physical changes that we've made. Really a couple interesting, really good questions, all good questions. One about bringing the interests of faculty and students into the library reopening process. One about thinking about current events and how we're assuring racial justice and equity in hiring in Michigan libraries. And one person who's interested in learning more about what community colleges are doing. So would love to hear from those on the call in our meeting who are working in community colleges and what is happening in your context. So I am going to stop there and take a breath. And Amber, how should we proceed from here? Maybe talking about some of the questions.
Absolutely. So I know, like you mentioned, we had some questions that were submitted ahead of time. I have a copy of those. I know you do as well. And I'm happy to go through those and we can talk through them. But before I do that, I want to open it up. And if anybody has any questions that they want to ask or discussion that they want to start with, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask Jennifer or ask anybody else on the call, or type it into the chat box, and we can, if there's anything urgent that you want to get started with. Otherwise, we can kind of go through some of these questions and just see how that discussion develops. Let's give you a moment to see if there's anything. We have one question in, and let's get started with that since we're doing that live. Curious to see how people will be handling periodicals. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Jennifer. And again, Jennifer is here to kind of lead this, but it's definitely open to all. No university or college or community college is going to handle this exactly the same as the rest of them. So I'm really interested to see what some other people on the call are doing, but we'll start with you, Jennifer. And I don't know if you have any plans for that in place yet, or if that's still something that's being worked through.
Sure. I'll jump in with a few thoughts and then, yeah, would love to hear and learn from others. So I'll just say really a majority of what we have in terms of periodicals, serials are online now. And we have been consciously, probably as many have been moving as much as we can to online only format where it makes sense. Where we're a Catholic institution, we do still have some things that are just only published in print format still, and where they really fit our institutional mission, we've kept them. But we're talking right now, should we, how long is this going to last? We are looking at funding, do we continue those? So do we reach out to those faculty? Are they being used? We are concerned that they weren't really being used and we're keeping them for the mission when they aren't necessarily filling an accreditation purpose. So that is an ongoing conversation. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear from others, but definitely electronic journals are our friend in this situation and getting a lot of use.
Yeah, I think the electronic resources are definitely getting, not that they weren't used before, but are definitely getting used much more heavily. So, so we have a comment in the chat box that I'll just mention. It just says, at CMU, we're planning on having closed stacks. Periodicals that are needed will be scanned by interlibrary loan team and sent as a PDF to the patron. We mostly have online journals now also. So that's an interesting idea, is the ones that can't be print to be scanned to them.
You know what I like about that is this might actually tell us, and I see some of our folks from Detroit Mercy are on the call, we have said, like, are these things getting used? That's going to tell us. Thank you, CMU, because, someone's saying, hey, I need this. We're going to know if this might give us some more concrete data on whether or not they are being used to say, if you need something, let us know. We'll get it. We'll scan it for you.
And it sounds like that's a popular, because it says CMU, Ferris State, WMU, and Kettering have all dittoed that. So it sounds like that's a pretty common plan for the fall. So there was a question, and I would love to have anyone from a community college that would like to speak up, but how are community colleges helping faculty that might not be used to teaching online or offering library instruction? So specifically for asynchronous library classes. Does anyone have any feedback on that just from a community college point of view? We have another message in the chat box that just says leveraging online videos and LibGuides, creating course-aligned modules in Canvas. That's a great idea. And regularly reminding campus groups of our chat and librarian online appointments. So right now, I think everyone is still kind of waking up and drinking their coffee. So I'm going to turn it back over to you for just a moment, Jennifer. But I know we had a lot, like you had mentioned, we had several questions about textbook reserves or other high touch items. I know you mentioned, calculators and those course reserves. Do you have thoughts about how you are planning to handle those types of things in the fall, or things that you're wrestling with trying to make that decision?
Yeah, we're definitely talking. Are there some things we just shouldn't deal with? Now, there are things that we can do with scanning. So again, if it's a reserve book item, a textbook's a tough one where, the student probably is, do they need the entire textbook? The rules right now, I believe the recent studies are still 3 days. So if you're going to quarantine something 3 days, that's not going to be very useful in a reserve environment. If it's a type of reserve material that you can scan something and have it available, electronic reserve, then that is going to, that's going to get around that having to deal with that print item and needing to quarantine it. A colleague that I talked to at another smaller institution had talked about, because they are small, he had a whole list of things he was asking, okay, before they ever said, hey, tell us what you need, we're going to do this. It was a list of questions that he's going to send that to me. I said, I want to see that. Asking faculty, hey, what are you teaching? Do you need this? Do you need that? And at the end, great. Okay. Do you have it scanned? Send this to us. Okay, we'll scan it for you. If there were things that they might have in their collection. As far as those smaller items, we stopped lending some of those things back in March when we were still open before when things were starting. And we just said, we didn't have the facility at that time to keep things cleaned. We were wondering at that time, and now we know. Something we didn't know at the beginning was there were a couple things. So in regard to keeping things clean, we didn't have the supplies on hand to keep things as clean as we felt we needed to let them circulate regularly. A lot of our circulation, of our folks in circulation, we have regular staff, but we also rely heavily on students there. We had a real moral discussion about, is it right to ask our students to be responsible for cleaning items, thinking we're in a pandemic here. We don't know what we're dealing with, to say, hey, your job is to come and clean these items. We now know, and I was fortunate to be able to be on our facility safety and health committee that are the larger work group from around the university. Our housekeeping folks, our custodial staff are not going to be able to keep up with the cleaning, especially in a place like the library. They're going to come in and clean once. So we are in the library, and I'm going to have to talk with the staff who are going to be working in the library. Okay, here's what we can and can't do. And that may mean that I'm going to have to say, okay, I am going to have to make a decision. What am I going to ask of, what's fair of me to ask of my staff? I never think of people as my staff, of our library staff. And I will hope that they will say to me, Jennifer, this is what I feel safe doing. So I may say, we are not going to be able to lend these things. And then hopefully that can lead to other discussions, so that I'm fortunate that I report to the provost. So I can say, hey, we have a concern. We've been able to help our students by providing calculators to check out. We're not going to be able to do that because we don't feel we can keep them clean enough because of the size of the staff we have. How else might we help our students who are looking for this? We have an amazing financial aid staff, and I'm amazed at some of the things they can do to find money here or there. So I would just encourage people, I'm getting way far afield here from like, what are we doing about reserves and small checkouts, but definitely to try to think outside the box. There are things that I am amazed at how we think in libraries and things we figure out to do for our students, and we keep them going, but sometimes the solution is outside of us. How can we, how do we help that student? And let's not try and kill ourselves to do what we've always done when maybe there's another way we can do it. So that's what I'll say about that. But I do think there are some things that we are just not going to be able to do because we will not be able to find a safe way to do it with the staff we will have on hand. Remembering that, wow, I still am going to need all these staff over here to make sure I've got a strong virtual presence as well. So that's my thoughts on that. Thank you, everybody, for my dissertation. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, as they say.
So we had a comment in the chat box, and I'm going to just call her out and ask Mary O'Kelly. I was reading your comment, and I was wondering if you would be willing to unmute yourself and kind of talk a little bit further about, you said from your research library point of view and what your staff is doing this summer. If you could talk about that a little bit further, I think the group would love to hear it. If you're willing to unmute yourself, Mary.
Sure, happy to do that. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Yeah, I just got a new headset and it's got a secondary mute button, and I keep finding that I occasionally, I mute myself twice.
You are from Western Michigan,
yes,
correct?
Western Michigan University. Yes, I'm the Associate Dean for Education and User Services. So all of our instruction activity and access services and public services is managed by people in my areas. We're wrestling with a lot of the same things. I know, Jennifer, what you were talking about at Detroit Mercy, a lot of the cleaning and anxiety and just how do we keep people safe and how do we manage that? And so we've made the same decision as I saw CMU and Ferris. I'm seeing from like Sarah and Lee in the comments that the librarians are planning on online instruction only. They do understand that there's a possibility, a slim possibility, that a faculty member may call and say, I really need you to come in person, but we're leaving it to the discretion of the librarian on whether or not they feel that it's safe and manageable when they do that. Right now, the default is they're going to say, let me show you what we have asynchronous. We're working on a combination of short videos. Some are generic, like Mendeley, Zotero, APA, things that are small and modular and could be embedded into a course, or a link to a YouTube video could be sent to a faculty member for them to share with their students. So that's more of a passive video approach. We're also looking at an interactive approach with using LibWizard, one of SpringShare's products, but then there also are some quiz, you can do some quizzes in our CMS. We don't use Blackboard, we use D2L, BrightStart D2L. And so by doing that, there's a way that faculty could take these pre-made library quizzes and embed them right into a course and then link it to the gradebook, so that faculty could work with the librarian on tweaking some of that. So that's more of an interactive type of asynchronous learning. And then they're also building up capacity to be able to do synchronous in-person courses. Right now we're looking at Zoom. Zoom has an interesting ability to break out into group discussions, but WebEx has the possibility to look at engagement and do polling. And so our campus supports WebEx. We have a campus license for that. So that's, the technology is binding us a little bit. Regarding things like LibGuides and course guides and subject guides, one of the things that the e-learning team on our campus, who does the online support for faculty, let us know that there is a way that they can ingest links automatically into courses using the course prefix. So one of the things we're looking at right now, it's going to be tedious because we've got about, oh, I don't know, 450 LibGuides, and that's after paring it down in a big project last year. But if we create course-specific guides or subject-related guides for, let's say, English 1050, ENGL, if we were to tag all of our LibGuides and subject guides that would be relevant for an English course with the ENGL prefix, there's a way that all English courses in the course management system, our campus e-learning can just ingest them as automatic links. And if this works the way we're hoping it works, it would be an opt-out for faculty when they get their course shell for trying to teach online or hybrid, or even in person but using the online course system. There would automatically be this subset of curated small links to library resources for that particular discipline, including a contact link for the librarian for that area. So if that works, that's going to be hugely supportive of us getting that information literacy instruction right into the hands of students without having to rely on trying to awkwardly replicate a one-shot in an online. I've done a lot of work in the past for years on online instruction. So it's in a way, it's so sad to see why it has to be this way, and with all of the stresses that we've got with the pandemic. But on the other hand, it's exciting to have all of the campus opportunity and all of the willingness to work with us. Just that the floodgates are wide open on getting the library up to speed on this online instruction. So I'm thrilled from that. If it gets us away from some of the habits we had been in the past, I regret it had to be done now. But I think there's a way we can make this really positive.
Thank you for sharing, Mary. Yeah, I think that was very interesting. I think it's a really cool system that you're working on, and I hope that it works the way that you want it to work when it all comes together. So again, thank you for sharing. Yeah. And I was just reading through some, oh, I'm sorry?
I just said really well said, Mary. Really exciting. I think really mirrors some of the conversations I've heard our research and instruction librarians have as well.
I'll mute myself back up now, but if anyone wants to email me offline for more information, I'd be happy to share.
Mary, would you be willing to put your email in the chat box then, in case people are interested in doing that? Oh, perfect. Thank you, Mary. So going through again some of the chat questions that have come in, I know there were a lot of comments about people having the closed stack. So we mentioned Kettering and Ferris, MSU, etc. There were several questions about what what will change that, or what are your requirements for reopening those stacks? And I don't know if any of one on the call would like to speak to that. If you're planning on doing closed stacks, do you have plans in place for reopening them? What are the guidelines that you have for when you determine that that will be safe, or is it just for the time being indefinitely they're closed, and then you'll have to determine that at a later date?
I'll jump in and say for us, we are closing our stacks mostly. Part of our periodical closing problem is it's in one of the areas that's open for study as well. For us, most of our stacks, we will have staff working on projects in our stacks. We also have small study areas in the stacks, which would make it hard for people to distance. So I think for us, they will just stay closed while we are limited. We will be running in restricted fashion simply because that's the safest way for us to run. So I don't know that we'll ever phase our stacks in. That's what's on my mind in terms of us closing our stacks. Not sure what others are thinking with regard to closed stacks and whether that's a forever or just a short-term solution.
Is there anyone on the call that is not closing their stacks in the fall? That might be another interesting conversation. Oh, Northern Michigan is planning to leave them open. I don't know, Leslie, if you, again, I'm going to call you out, but if you want to speak a little bit, if you're willing, how are you going to manage that? And how are you going to maintain social distancing or cleaning after that if you are having those stacks open with students and faculty coming in?
So we've been having conversations and walkthroughs with our head of public safety, with our facilities people who are responsible for COVID response, and with our risk management people, as we've been going through and assessing a variety of needs for the library. And we talked a little bit about the stacks. We talked about them first in the context of social distancing and how our tables are spread out. As it happens, our stacks are in our quietest area, so we don't have seating for groups in our stacks. We have individual seating, which makes social distancing much easier. And it's designed for people not to be close to each other for quiet study. We talked a little bit, we're planning on doing the quarantine for books that circulate through interlibrary loan and for returns, but we talked a little bit about what to do with just having stacks open. If somebody just pulls something off the shelf, looks at it, decides I don't want it, obviously they're supposed to not reshelve it, but we wouldn't know if they do or not. And we talked about the risk versus benefit. And at this point, there's even though we have the 3-day guideline for quarantining with things, it's looking like there's very little risk of transmission through touched objects, especially objects that are touched in just that brief way. And when you consider the size of our stacks versus the odds that any given book is going to be touched twice anyway, aside from maybe whether it's our students who are going to be reshelving during the circular or during the use count, our students can be wearing gloves while they do that. But it just seems like it's very, very minimal risk that's involved to have our stacks open, and the risk that's involved in going back to classes in general seems significantly greater than the risk of having our stacks still open.
Leslie, this is Debbie. We had the same conversation with the governor's advisory group, and a lot of the conversation came back to grocery stores when we talked about reshelving books and people touching them. And when you're in a grocery store, we didn't actually acknowledge that there was anything wrong with that. But when people are in a grocery store, in the very same way, if you pick up a cheese and you don't like that brand and you put it back, it's almost in exactly the same kind of context. So, but there was a lot of discussion with the governor's advisory group on that very subject. And we just ended up, we were waiting for that kind of definitive guideline from IMLS and from the studies that were happening, and that was more important to us about books being sent home and then coming back than things that were just being touched.
Yep. That's kind of how we're coming down on it too, that things are coming back to us through circulation. We're planning to quarantine those, even though again, it's starting to look like just the transmission possibilities from objects is small because you have so few of the I don't know, cooties, viral particles, whatever. We have, fortunately, at Northern, we have like real biologists who are involved and real epidemiologist people who are involved in the planning. So I don't have to know the vocabulary other than cooties. But the risk from those cooties is really kind of small. So yeah, we're opting for let the students have some experience. It's not as dangerous as all of the other things that are going on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Leslie. And to call out one other person, I know Molly Fryer has made several comments in the chat box. And I know one thing you mentioned about doing all reference via chat or Zoom and do that virtual. And I don't know if you're willing to maybe speak briefly about how that is going for you and how that is helping maintain some of your social distancing for any people that are maybe looking to implement that.
Yeah, well, we've always had chat reference at the desk. We log in as the desk, and then librarians can be logged in individually. Several summers ago, we went to on-call reference. We usually have someone out at the desk during the daytime hours, but there wasn't really a need for it during the summer. We weren't getting a lot of reference questions. So we went to chat reference. So if somebody came up to the desk and needed reference assistance, the circ staff would chat the librarian who could come out and deal with the patron or whatever. So we just, when the library closed to the public, when the governor's order came on, we went to that system and have relied on that for that entire time. I guess it's more than 3 months now. And so even as I speak, I am logged in as Olson Library so that all of the other librarians who are currently logged in to the chat will receive, we know that it's on. And so if somebody chats Olson Library, Bruce or Mike or somebody else can pick it up. Worst case, I pick it up even as I'm speaking. I say, sorry guys, I'm like Batman, I've been signaled. And that's kind of nice. We added a place where the patron could request a Zoom conference or where we could switch it over to Zoom conferencing, because sometimes the online chat isn't the best vehicle for helping a patron who really needs instruction, not just reference. So that's what we're going to be doing in the fall, in part because when the walkthroughs occurred, it was determined that having the reference librarian out at our public services desk would cramp things too much to maintain social distancing. And so we said, okay, fine. So we'll be available via Zoom, and we can also set up appointments for reference, which we often do. And we will, and have been doing those via Zoom, which also enables screen sharing, which is nice because you can say, okay, here's what my screen looks like. Here's what I'm doing. It's not like I'm talking in a vacuum. So it is what it is. I'll be honest, this spring, most of our questions have been about how do I return my library books?
Well, at least they're trying to return them. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Molly. Switching gears a little bit, I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer for just a moment and ask, we've gotten a lot of questions in the chat box, and I'll open this up to everyone as well, but I'm curious to see what Jennifer has to say about policing social distancing and mask wearing and enforcement of those policies. And I think that's definitely a concern we've heard at MLA from academic and public libraries. And that's probably the #1 question that we've gotten throughout this time is how do we enforce that? How do we uphold those standards? And so I don't know if people, like I said, Jennifer, I'll start with you, what your thoughts are on that, or if you have plans for enforcement of those safety procedures that are going to be put into place.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that, about who is going to be responsible for doing that and how do we ensure that the right people, that sounds terrible, but is going to be the people that are going to be the front face when we come in, and that not everyone on our staff is going to be suited for that task. And what is going to be like our first pass of, hey, you have to have a mask on when you're here in the building, and what's going to be our second pass. And I hope you'll forgive me because I'm going to morph a little bit here as I think about this. I'm thinking about some really great discussion that was happening at ALA and the question that was asked about racial justice, and thinking about the question that someone asked was actually about hiring practices. But I'm thinking about racial justice in general in the library, and thinking about, so we have public safety on our campus. So I certainly would have the opportunity to say, okay, we got a person who will not wear their mask, call public safety, they can deal with this person. We're actually being called upon in this moment to say, what person-centered techniques can we use to try and deal with people in a way that doesn't involve calling in, the big guns to deal with this situation? So I'm not giving you an answer. I'm saying here are a couple of things I'm thinking about that the current moment is getting me to think about, but also thinking I'm in a pandemic and I've got a whole building full of people that need to be safe. So I think I'm lucky in that I do have some folks who work in our we still call it circulation here, circulation department, who are pretty good at saying, hey, you need to have a mask on, you need to social distance here. We've got a pretty, we're a small campus. I also want to say, someone had asked in the chat about community users. So people who come in to use your campus from outside of your student and faculty base. We actually have permission to limit our access to community. That was a hard decision because part of our mission is to be open to everyone. But we do feel it's safer right now as a private institution to say registered students and employees only. So that's going to make it easier for us. Although again, that's infringing on sort of our social justice mission. But all of that to say, so that ties into, okay, we're sort of saying, okay, this limits who can be in the library. So that should make it easier for us to say, this is who's going to be in here. So you're a student here. There's some larger issues that are going to help us enforce that too. So one step below saying call public safety. Everyone who comes to campus, our university has a code of, it's not a code, it's a pledge of, hey, we're all in this together. If I'm on campus, I have pledged that I will be responsible for myself and others. That's going to be handled through the Dean of Students office. So anyone who is taking a class on campus, who lives in the res halls, who will be on campus for any other reason, will have to sign that pledge, will have to have read, well, they will indicate that they will have read, fairly, I think we've gotten it down to one page, but to say, these are the things I'm agreeing to do. So we do have a few different steps in place so that by the time they come to the library, if they're going to be inclined to argue with us about wearing a mask, we're going to say, hey, you've already agreed to this. So I'm hoping it will not be a big deal, but we are going to have to sit and talk about, okay, so what are the steps we're going to do? Because we had some discussion back at the beginning of all this, that we didn't want to be in a situation, we caution people to say something I still haven't worked out, and I'd be curious to hear from others. People suffer from allergies. People are going to get colds. I would be really afraid if I were sitting at the front desk and somebody were sneezing right now. But what if that person just has an allergy? Do I assume? Well, that's not going to be an issue because now we have, we have to actually answer screening questions now to come to campus. Do I have any of these signs? If you answer yes to any of these questions, you have to have a doctor's note that says, yes, I'm sneezing, but look, it's an allergy. Okay, so I'm raising a lot more questions than answers. All of that, we do have several pieces in place though. So that pledge that people have, we have the screening protocol so that we'll be able to sit down and walk through with our staff that these pieces are going to be in place. So what's our first step? Ask people, maybe they just don't know, be kind, please, you need to wear your mask, and that we'll have, no one will ever be, what's our layers? You're first. If you're not here, who's the supervisor? Bring me out, I'll ask them. How do we work with people? And again, that idea of how do we be gentle with people? We don't know what people are dealing with. Is there some reason why they might be in a position to be fighting with us? But I'll stop there. I get way too far afield. I think often it might be as simple as, hey, did you forget, maybe you came in from outside and you forgot to put your mask on. So maybe to assume, first of all, assume good intent, ask first. But I think we're going to need to be intentional and make sure that people understand. Like I say, I'm going to have conversations with everybody who works at the front, because we agreed with our staff. We have people who have really specific roles, some of which doesn't involve public service, but I think I may have to change some of that up, because not everybody's going to be on campus. Are you going to be comfortable doing this? You know, here's what it's going to look like. Let's practice it a little bit. So that's some things that I'm thinking about.
I think those are all really great points. And I think you brought up a really great point of the that intersection between of racial justice and the pandemic. And we're in, you know, multiple crises at the same time that we're trying to work our way through. And it does enforcement of a mask policy create, you know, issues in terms of, you know, equity and racial justice, and how do you police that fairly for everyone without any bias. So I think that that's definitely an important conversation to have. I don't know that we have time for that full conversation now, but it's definitely an important thing to keep in mind as we're reopening and as we're enforcing those rules. Yeah, thank you for sharing. A lot of comments, just thank you for sharing. And, you know, comment about just having some disposable masks available in case someone has forgotten. And for anyone that wasn't, we had a few weeks ago, our coffee hour, we had Casey Coker, who's a psychotherapist from Bronson Health on, and she talked about de-escalating those situations. And that was, Jennifer, you echoed a lot. I know you weren't on that call, but you echoed a lot of what she said, which is when you approach, she used the term, don't go in hot, don't go in assuming that they are doing it to cause an issue or to be combative. Go in and just say, hey, no, she didn't have a mask. Do you need one? You know, and go in assuming good intent before, you know, creating an escalated situation. So I think that's an important tip to remember, and how you approach that situation can have a lot of impact on the outcome of it. So, yep, so disposable masks. And so we have about five or 6 minutes left, and I just want to, again, open it up, see what questions people may have that haven't been addressed yet. I encourage anyone that is interested to unmute themselves and speak up. If there are any questions or comments that you feel like may have been missed. We've been trying to keep up with the chat. Typically we have Rachel in our office who helps monitor the chat for us, and she's out on vacation this week. So we're kind of managing both, and I know that there's some in there that I missed. So if anyone has anything that they want to add, please, I encourage you to speak up.
Hi, this is Sandra at CMU. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great, Sandra.
Great. I have a question about how somebody had talked about that, mentioned once, but how are people going to monitor the number of people in the library? So if you have, you know, your open space, your open patron space, and you're allowed however many per square feet, how are you going to monitor how many people you have in, or track that? So that's my question. Just kind of curious what other people are thinking about doing, or what they have planned. Something that we're thinking about here at CMU.
That's a good question, because you have a huge building there. We have a much smaller space to deal with, because I've been thinking, okay, I'm going to set it up. I'm going to move all the excess chairs to the basement. I'm going to put some tape on the floor. But then I'm thinking, what if I get more demand than what I have set up? I haven't quite worked it out yet. So yeah, I'd be really curious to hear from people who have large spaces like you do.
If I could answer that, I'm from Madonna University, and we have about 3,000 students on campus. And so our library, our physical space is smaller. We're going to cordon off and make it our stack side access for staff only. And we'll be dealing with about half of our floor space. But I also have the writing center in my footprint and the tutoring center in my footprint. So we're trying to coordinate the floor space between 3 departments. And the answer I've come up with is to create a pass that will be barcoded, and I'll have different colors for the different departments. And we'll have to have very good communication with each other. If I know that there's a tutoring appointment at 10 o'clock, I would have to put that pass aside. And if there's one for the writing center, I would have to put that pass aside. I'm going to encourage people to make appointments so we'll know who's expected when. And then if we have a walk-in, we would look to see if the passes are available. If there's one, okay, we can let one person in. And if usage increases, if there's high demand, we can put a time limit on those passes. We'll have a like a plastic sleeve protector taped at the end of a table where the pass will sit, so the students don't need to touch those, and it will be barcoded where they check the pass in and then they bring it back to us and check it out. It'll be laminated and we can clean it, and we're hoping that that will work. So that's our plan.
Thank you for sharing, Cynthia.
Sure, sure.
There was also a comment from David with Calvin University that they're considering locking some of their doors and requiring swiping in, and then using their room scheduler to identify individual seats in the library and schedule those as well. So, and David, you're welcome to speak up, or anybody else if you have any other ideas that maybe haven't been mentioned for how to just maintain that, you know, enforce that capacity limit within your spaces.
Put something in the chat about FDLP, and it's not the link I was looking for. I just looked at it a little closer.
Oh.
There was something, and I was talking with our law librarian. There is something of someone really good question in the chat. If you're a federal depository library, about limiting access to the public. And I know I saw it. I'm going to look it up and I'll send it on. But there is just a process of notification. There is an affordance for, so typically if you're an FDLP, you have to allow the public. But there is an affordance during the pandemic to limit that right now. And so that's what that is also playing into. Someone had asked, how are you limiting to the public if you are FDLP? So I need to go back and look at that because that is something we did early on. So yes, that is a concern for us too. It's part of our mission, but it's also part of the FDLP rules, something you agree to when you become a federal depository library. So really good question there. I'm going to look that up. I'm going to look up the right one. The link I shared does talk about if you're closed for an extended period, the communication that you need to do with the GPO, Government Publications Office.
Yeah, we'd be happy to share that after the fact too, if you locate that. And then one, we only have a couple minutes left, but I think that this is a good question, and I'm going to use this as our last one before we wrap up. But is anyone hiring extra staff to clean, or do you expect your current staff to take on a lot of those duties? I don't know if that's a conversation that people have had yet or figured out what they're going to do to manage those extra cleaning duties that are going to be required once you reopen. And maybe Jennifer, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Are you planning to hire anybody or bring in anybody extra to do any of that work?
No, we aren't.
Yeah.
Like I say, we're really debating right now, do we hire student assistants? And there has been some discussion on our campus. While we have staff furloughed, should we hire students? And right now we are not hiring any students while staff are furloughed. And so, as I say, I'll be talking with our HR folks. That is an interesting thought, though. I don't know. We do outsource our custodial staff, and I don't believe they are bringing in extra people. I don't know if they are at the dental school. So some of that could be happening outside of the library, not by me, but by other departments in the university. Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation that we just aren't going to be able to fit into the 1 hour time slot, and definitely conversations that we're going to continue to need to have as we approach the fall and then actually get into once some of these academic libraries start opening and seeing how things go. And I know we've experienced throughout the state some reversal of, opening and then having to close down again. And so it'll be interesting to see what practices maybe are more beneficial than others once put into play once they reopen in the fall. But fortunately we only had an hour today, so we just kind of were able to scratch the surface on some of these, but definitely conversations that we're going to continue having. So I encourage you to visit MLA's website. We have a lot of coronavirus and reopening resources there, as well as to continue to attend coffee hours or webinars that we're having where we keep these conversations going. So we're going to have to wrap it up there because we are at 11. So I just want to say thank you first and foremost to Jennifer for helping lead this today, and thank you to everyone that typed in the chat box and that spoke up and contributed. I think it was a really good conversation, and no one here has all the answers, but I think if we kind of talk and put your heads together, you guys can come up with some really great solutions. So I want to let everyone know that this will be posted to the MLA website later. So if you want to revisit any of that, including the chat transcript, we will have that available in case there are any notes or resources that you would like to save. We will make those available to you. And then any other questions that you have following this, we encourage you to connect with MLA staff, and if we don't know the answer, we'll do our best to find you that answer, just like you do for everyone else that comes to you. So everyone have a wonderful day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amber.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks, everyone.